Lazal. He did say you would. Thank you very much, colleagues. Have a good day for the conference.
It wasn't rigged, I promise, guys. It was good. Return, thank you so much for your support and just being here with us, sharing it with us. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that don't know, after the gift, my name is Lazelle, and I am the winner of the gift. But I've also been asked to be the MC for today. Now, like I've indicated before, today is a bit of a deconstructed program in the sense that we started with preliminary sessions. Now, breakaway sessions are now going to, well, preliminary sessions is following now after our breakaway session. So without further delay, I'm going to ask the first preliminary introductor, Professor Tiwari. He's looking so spiffy today in his blue shirt and his purple tie. So please introduce to us our first speaker for today. And that would be Professor Saxena. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. Morning. All protocol observed. Great pleasure to introduce Prof. Saxena from India. He's going to speak on education in Africa and Asia, evolving human resources for potential economic growth.
This is a tricky one.
Prof. Saxena is a professor and head and dean of education, also campus director of Doladar campus of Central University of Himachal Pradesh.
And then we're going to switch to online.
He is the honorary director of OER cell of CUSP and honorary director of Deen Dayal Upadhyay Kaushal Kendra for almost 4 years. He has a master in commerce and PhD in education from MJP Rohilkhand University, Berlin. Rich experience of 25 years in teaching and educational administration. Worked as a chairman, member, coordinator, and member of NARC peer team, which is just like a DHET here. It's a DHET in India. So that's quite powerful. Member visiting team of NCTE and also member of UGC expert committee. Just like a DHET expert committee. He is a member of many other organizations. Mainly areas of specialization include ICT in education, teacher education, tribal education, and research methodology. He has produced a number of PhDs, from 8 PhDs, number of masters and other students, honors. And also a member of University Court, Academic Council, and chairman of School Board, convener, Board of Studies in Education at Central University of Himachal Pradesh, Dharamshala. Completed number of studies. To his credit, there are 9 books, 97 research papers, in various national and international journals, and given umpteen number of valedictory addresses, special lectures, and so on. In brief, apart from these academic ventures, he has been decorated as President's Scout by His Excellency, the President of India in 1980 years. So that's quite an achievement. He is recipient of Rotary International Rotary Leadership Award. He has been conferred with Excellent Teacher Award 2021 by Sociological Society of Himachal Pradesh. Recently, he has been conferred with Honorary Fellow by South Asian Institute for Advanced Research and Development, Kolkata, and Best Teacher Award for 2022 by New Global Research Foundation, Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay Nagar, Chandoli. So these are some of his achievements. I'm sure there are many more. He has a wealth of experience in education. Today, he will share some of his ideas. Education in Africa and Asia, evolving human resources for potential economic growth. Prof. Sakshina, welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, all. The Dean, Faculty of Commerce, Administration and Law, Professor Gerling. Pronunciation is right? Split. Thank you. The chair of the conference, Professor Irshad Kasiram. My friend, Professor Dev Tiwari. Ms. Lizan. The members of organizing committee and all the dignitaries present at this 2023 International Conference, MBALI, on the theme Africa Rising. It is a matter of great pride and honor for me to be here on this international platform for presenting my views on the topic of extreme importance, the rising impact of Africa and Asia in the field of education. As we all know that these continents have diverse cultures, traditions, and histories. Hence, a major transformation has been observed in the field of the education in recent years. It is well-known fact that the education plays a pivotal role in the development and empowerment. It is a key that opens possibilities, ignites ideas, and transforms lives. It is a key way of developing skills for democratic and progressive society. It must create thoughtful, critically reflective, and socially engaged individuals rather than passive recipients of established knowledge. Education must focus to enhance and help individuals to understand the importance of shared meanings of culture. This way, learning would attain its democratic ideas. Education must focus on the interest of learners and their emotional response. It must help learners to reflect critically and intelligently on their experiences in order to understand, know, and analyze social realities. Only then would serve its purpose in contemporary times, particularly in Africa and Asia. Education is for life and thus unfolds innumerable horizons of possibilities and understanding. As a result, it must not be an imitation of the colonized educational models. Education acts as a catalyst for socio-economic development in African and Asian societies. Through commitment, innovation, and funding, both continents are putting on their best efforts to achieve sustainable development and empower individuals by shaping the future of education. Because these continents have gone through different social, political, economic, and cultural changes with time. These changes have had a significant impact on education. Besides the impact of these changes, both the continents had progressed to a great extent on the ladder of learning and development. African and Asia experienced remarkable achievements in various sectors in recent years. These two continents home the majority of the world population and are undergoing major changes that are shaping the global landscape. Africa, often referred as the rising continent, has experienced impressive economic growth and development. Several factors have contributed to this upward trend, including improved governance, increased political stability, and the education system. The African Union's Agenda 2063, which envisions a united and prosperous Africa, continues to emphasize the continent's commitment to rise on the global platform. According to Economic Development in Africa report, African economies currently have a lot of opportunities to change and increase their degree of diversification and competitiveness. Further, if we talk about Asia, it is also an emerging continent led by countries like China, India, South Korea, and Japan. According to Tonbe et al., Asia is the largest regional economy in the world, and as its economies, commerce, innovation, cultural exchange, and people flows deepen, so will its influence. The rise of Asian economies and tremendous growth in various sectors has not only increased regional integration, but has also contributed to stronger economic ties with other parts of the world. It is in the interest of Asia and Africa to establish deeper partnership as Africa starts to re-emerge as a chessboard for world powers. Like various other fields, Africa and Asia have seen growth in the field of education also. But education in Africa and Asia varies depending on the region and socioeconomic status of the people. See, it is my proud privilege that today I have got this opportunity to present a comparative study of education in Africa and Asia, which are two vibrant and diverse continents experiencing dramatic changes in their educational system. The rising Africa and Asia have reaped numerous benefits in the field of education. These include improved literacy rates, improved skills and knowledge, increased innovation and productivity, and overall socioeconomic development. Comparing the education system of both continents will bring several academic benefits to both the regions, as it will definitely identify best practices and successful strategies that have led to positive learning outcomes. The comparison of these will help the researchers and educators to gain insight into culturally relevant instructional strategies, curriculum adoptions, and inclusive strategies that meet the unique needs of students in different contexts. The comparison will also help address common challenges faced by both the communities. Issues such as poor infrastructure, lack of resources, lack of teachers, and inequality gaps are common in Africa and Asia. With this comparison, policymakers will be able to identify common challenges and share effective strategies to overcome them. The collaborative problem-solving approach can lead to targeted interventions and shared solutions to improve learning outcomes on both the sides. It will also encourage research and scholarly exchange and will provide opportunities for collaborative research projects and contributes to the academic literature. Research collaboration will further lead to new insights, methodologies, and new ideas that will undoubtedly benefit the scholars and practitioners in both the fields. Through this comparative analysis, both regions can make informed decisions and promote progress in education to provide a rewarding learning environment. For comparing the education system of both the countries, two important factors have been taken into consideration, such as educational policies colonization and decolonization of education, curriculum, medium of instruction, and more importantly, indigenous education. A comparison of both these aspects in both the continents in general and South Africa and India in particular. Let us talk about educational structure and policies in Africa and Asia. Africa Continental Educational Strategies in Africa was adopted by the African Union in 2020. The plan aims to improve education and skills development across the continent in line with the African Union's Agenda 2063. In South Africa, national and provincial governments share responsibility for the education system, with the provinces primarily enforcing national policies, while provincial government are in charge of carrying out basic education, that is primary and secondary. And the national government is also in charge of regulating higher education and the private education systems. While local government do not directly oversee education, they are in charge of providing essential facilities such as power, water, sewerage, garbage removal, and the construction of schools. Several institutional mechanisms act to ensure effective coordination between policymakers and policy implementers. A modest number of private schools, colleges, and higher education facilitates supplement the majority of state educational institutions. Provide development opportunities for young people who are unemployed and could benefit from practical training. Important departments have implemented an integrated development plan, which includes training and skill development through the apprenticeship program. The autonomy of provincial government charged with executing education policy may be a severe obstacle to ensuring successful outcomes in education due to resource redistributions. Basic education or schooling is a concurrent function shared between national and provincial governments. South Africa follows a 12-year school system with 7 years of primary education and 5 years of secondary education. While public school follows the national curriculum's statement, private schools have different curricula. The National Education Policy Act 2020 is the recent one in the field of education in South Africa. It has included various plans for resource provision, curriculum development, and teacher training. The main focus is on addressing the issues of access and quality equity, especially for disadvantaged people. Along with this, there are other education policies and initiatives also in South Africa, such as the National Development Plan and Basic Education Sectoral Plan. Education policies in Asia vary depending on the region. Many Asian countries emphasizes academic achievement and have competitive education system. With investment in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, education is one of the major focuses. Skills training and vocational education are given equal importance to prepare students for their future. In India, free, compulsory, inclusive, and protective for minorities, originally developed to the states, altered in 1976 to centralized power. The National Education Policy of 1968 recognized the system to ensure free access irrespective of caste and gender to attain a comparably quality of education up to a certain level. The National Education Policy of 1986 expanded opportunities, called for a consolidation of the existing system of higher education and technical education, mandated free education up to the age of 14, focused on the role of technology in education and paid more attention to restructuring the teacher's education, early childhood care, adult literacy, and women empowerment. The National Education Policy of 1986 and Program of Action of 1992 placed a strong emphasis on strengthening vocational education, eradicating illiteracy among those aged 15 to 35, and emphasizing girls' education. Need-based vocational training and non-formal education. India follows the 10+2 system with 10 years of primary and secondary education, followed by 2 years of senior secondary education. The curriculum varies across the states and boards, including the Central Board of Secondary Education and the Indian Certificate of Education. The central government of India policies and carries out legislation and programs about education throughout the nation. The Department of Education and State Council of Educational Research and Training are key players in education sector at the state level. Each state has the authority to establish, oversee, and dissolve universities. The standards in education are regulated and upheld by the Ministry of Education. Professional courses are governed by 15 professional councils, including the Medical Council of India, Bar Council, and others. Education is provided by public-private and public-private partnerships, school education, higher education, pre-primary education. Anganwadis are also regulated by concerned national and state authorities. The emergence of non-profit organizations serving as important educators for underprivileged people. So that the latest education policy in India is National Education Policy 2020, which was launched in July 2020. It attempts to transform the education system by introducing reforms such as curriculum innovations, flexible learning, and greater use of technology. The policy aims to deliver a personalized education program that meets the individual needs of students and encourages growth. Certificate programs, in-service training, and adult education are accessible, and opportunities for impaired students to pursue education are also there. It is also lays particular emphasis on the development of the creative potential of each individual. It is based on the principle that education must develop not only cognitive capacities, both the functional capacities of literacy and numeracy and higher order cognitive capacities such as critical thinking and problem solving, but also social, ethical, and emotional capacities and dispositions. It focuses on pursuit of knowledge, wisdom, and truth as Indian ideals. The policy also aims to produce engaged, productive, and contributing citizens for building an equitable, inclusive, and plural society. Policy envisages that curriculum and pedagogy of our institutions must develop among the students a deep sense of respect towards the fundamental duties and constitutional values, bonding with one's country and conscious awareness on one's role and responsibilities in a changing world. The policy also instructs to provide effective and sufficient infrastructure so that all students have access to safe and engaging school education at all the levels. And the idea is relevant in other Asian and African countries as well. Tracking students in another approach proposed by the policy to check dropout rates and about the dropout students. Then there is focus on socio-economically disadvantaged groups and philanthropic organizations, community participation, and alumni role in engaging and learning by providing one-on-one mentoring and tutoring within the country. Africa and other Asian countries may learn from the aforementioned approaches proposed by our NEP 2020. As far as decolonization of education in Africa and Asia is concerned, the process of decolonization describes one of the most fundamental historical developments of the 20th century. Decolonization is opposite to colonial ways of thinking and acting. It demands an indigenous starting point and an articulation of the decolonization means for indigenous people of different countries. It is a process by which colonies became independent of the colonizers. Decolonization involves engagement with the experiences of colonization and its past and present effects, both the local level and ex-colonial societies as well as at the level of more general global development thoughts to be the after effects of the empire. It also involves recognizing the effects on education. Decolonization is essential for creating a fair and inclusive education system that enables students to reach their full potential. Decolonization of education in Africa refers to the process of removing the effect of colonialism from the education system of African countries. It seeks to empower African countries to develop their own education system that reflect their history, language, and culture. Challenges consist of confined resources and resistance to exchange, but many initiatives are being undertaken to support decolonization, such as curriculum development, teacher training programs, and policy recommendations change. Since the end of apartheid, efforts have been made in South Africa to decolonize education and promote equality, but challenges remain in terms of access to quality education and addressing disparities among their racial and socioeconomic groups. Ultimately, the decolonization of education in Africa is critical to the future development and prosperity of the continent. By improving and empowering students with the knowledge and skills to understand the world and find the right direction, Africa can build a brighter future that reflects its unique identity and history. Decolonization of education in Asia requires rethinking the way education is delivered and changing the curriculum to include a greater focus on local culture and traditions. This can be achieved by integrating the native knowledge framework, local language, and cultural practices into the curriculum, whilst challenging dominant Western ideologies and encouraging critical thinking and reception of dominant narratives. Some Asian countries have already taken steps to eliminate their education system. In Malaysia, for example, efforts have been made to promote the use of local languages in education and to integrate indigenous history and culture into the curriculum. There has been a push in India to promote and introduce indigenous knowledge system and local culture determined curriculum after the introduction of this NEP 2020. After independence, India made efforts to decolonize education by promoting inclusivity, regional languages, and cultural perspectives in the curriculum. India has been a colony of the British Empire for 2 centuries. In these eventful 2 centuries, the indigenous education system was gradually displaced and colonial model of education prevailed under the patronage from the colonial state. The language, pedagogy, evaluation, and knowledge of the colonizer became naturalist obligato for the population of the colony. India got independence in 1947 and took the task of decolonizing education immediately. The attempts to decolonize education from various standpoints of political activism, universalism, and religious nationalism were main concerns of the decolonization process. What decolonizing education should entail and how India has responded to this question in the last century and how to neoliberal order has supported the particular ideology have dominant say in this process could be the guiding principle for decolonization in other countries throughout the globe. However, challenges remain in ensuring equitable access to quality education, addressing regional disparities, and integrating indigenous knowledge system into the mainstream framework. Ongoing efforts aim to create a more inclusive and diverse education system that reflects India's rich cultural heritage. Decolonization of education in Asia is therefore a complex and ongoing process in which challenging the colonial legacy and promoting local culture and tradition is an important step towards an inclusive education system, and it is perfect that meets the need of all the students. If we talk about curriculum in Africa and Asia, the school curriculum and its related issues have turned out to be the subject of debate among educationalists in the recent years. The new social, cultural, political, and economic development have shaped a new understanding of the school curriculum and affected the educational practices all over the world. The designing curriculum in African and Asian countries show colonial dents devoid of educative experience and problem of indigenous origin. The curriculum must be relevant to the student experience and life. The curriculum in Africa varies from country to country but generally reflects colonial heritage through a focus of traditional education. Efforts are made to incorporate practical vocational training, inculcate indigenous knowledge, and promote local languages. Challenges include lack of infrastructure and shortage of various resources. South Africa has a curriculum assessment policy statement that identifies learning areas at different stages. It strives to provide comprehensive and balanced teaching, develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Curriculum in Asia mainly emphasizes core subject, with a strong focus on rigor, testing, and high-pressure situations. Stress on technology and STEM-based education is given. The curriculum in India varies from state to state, and recent changes have focused on skill development and practical knowledge. Vocational education has been introduced right from the secondary level as recommended by NEP 2020, which outline various educational approaches and aims to provide students with a well-rounded education. As far as the medium of instruction in Africa and Asia is concerned, Africa is known for its cultural and linguistic diversity, with over 1,500 languages spoken across the continent. Education in Africa varies according to the region, with some using official languages, while others incorporate the vernacular and try to enforce multilingualism based on their mother tongue to improve academic achievement. Hence, the medium of instruction in Africa is a complex issue. And it is important to consider the continent's linguistic and cultural diversity in the development of educational policies and programs. English and Afrikaans have traditionally been used in South Africa, but there are various policies which encourage the use of other languages and diversity. Teaching methods also vary across Asia, with some countries adopting English, while others use their official language or a mixture of languages. Many countries have their own official languages as a medium of instruction. In China, for example, Mandarin is the main language of instruction in schools and universities. Japanese language and method of teaching in Japan. In some countries, there is a mixture of languages used as teaching methods. For example, in Malaysia, the government has implemented a bilingual education system where both Malay and English are used in the schools. So the style of teaching in Asia is diverse and reflective of the continent's culture and language revealed. In India, the mode of instruction depends on the institution and the state, with English predominating in urban areas and regional languages in rural and government schools. In some states like Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra, the mode of instruction in government schools is the official language, which is Tamil and Marathi respectively. The diversity of language and cultures in Asia and Africa determines the choice of teaching methods in education. As far as indigenous education in Africa and Asia is concerned, it is a spatially and culturally context-specific, collective, holistic, and adaptive. Although it was previously largely ignored, but it is currently living a revival and incorporation is seen as essential. Indigenous education in Africa and Asia is characterized by efforts to combine conventional knowledge and practice into formal education system. In Africa, there is a governing recognition of the implication of incorporating indigenous information into curricula to keep the cultural background and decorate the relevance of education. African indigenous education is the base for the foundation of education for self-reliance in contemporary education. First, it helps to preserve and promote traditional knowledge and practices unique to African cultures. Second, it can improve the effectiveness and efficiency of formal learning, making it accessible and meaningful to students. Finally, it can raise students' self-esteem and cultural identity and foster greater pride in their heritage. Several African countries, such as South Africa, have developed outlines to teach indigenous languages, their history and culture. Challenges include various resources, training, constraints for teachers, and the need for additional research and documentation. African countries use many different languages along with the official language inherited from colonial history as the medium of instruction. To preserve linguistic diversity and to improve learning outcomes, use of mother tongue and regional languages encouraged. In Asia, indigenous education is a challenge due to various languages and cultural differences. Efforts are being made to include traditional expertise and practices into present-day curricula and address the language barriers. There is a growing emphasis on indigenous self-determination in education, permitting indigenous communities to form their academic framework. To address this, some countries have implemented bilingual or multilingual education programs aimed at the preserving indigenous language and cultures while also providing broad educational opportunities. In India, various initiatives have been planned after the introduction of the National Education Policy 2020, including the establishment of tribal research institutes, the inclusion of indigenous perspectives in school curricula, and community-led educational programs. The recognition and revitalization of indigenous education in India aim to promote cultural diversity, social justice, and sustainable development. Finally, there is an increasing recognition of the importance of indigenous self-determination in education. This means that indigenous communities should have a say in how they develop and implement their own education systems, rather than shaping national and international policies that may not be entirely in line with their values and practices. It can also involve cooperative collaborations between communities and specialized educational institutions. Hence, the issue of indigenous education in Asia is complex and multifaceted. But there are many promising initiatives and movements that are taking place with the aim of promoting the recognition and integration of indigenous knowledge and practice into formal education programs. Indigenous education in Africa and Asia pursues to preserve cultural identity, decorate instructional relevance, and foster inclusive and equitable society. The valuable insights got by exploring the growth opportunities and challenges in the field of education in both the lands can be highlighted as a striking feature of the educational landscape in Asia, Africa and Asia is the promise to access and inclusion. Although access to education in Africa and Asia remains a significant challenge, barriers such as poverty, conflict, gender inequality, and inadequate infrastructure persist in Africa, leading to gap in educational opportunities. Although progress has been made to increase enrollment, especially in primary education, both countries and both the continents rather still lag in overall access to education. Recognizing the importance of ensuring access to education for all, efforts have been made to remove barriers. Government of both the continents have implemented various policies to improve access to education. India has made tremendous progress in access to education, especially in primary education. However, challenges remain in reaching equal access to rural and marginalized areas and reduce the gender gap in education. Enrollment rates are high in India, but there are concerns about academic outcomes. Standardized tests such as National Achievement Survey shows that there are learning gaps, especially in rural and disadvantaged communities. South Africa has also made effort to increase access to education, but gap remains. South Africa also faces challenges in terms of educational attainment. Enrollment rates in the country have improved, but there are concerns about low literacy and numeracy, especially among disadvantaged groups. Issues such as inadequate infrastructure, socioeconomic inequality, and lack of quality education in remote areas are the challenge faced by the country. India and South Africa are working to address these challenges and improve their education system. However, it is important to note that the educational landscape is large and complex, and within each country, there may be variation depending upon socioeconomic factors, local diversity, and individual institutions. As far as quality education, we talk about ensuring quality education in Africa and Asia is another one of the major challenges. Limited resources and lack of trained teachers hinder the provision of high quality education in many parts of both the continents. Training of teachers reforms in the curriculum and integration technology are underway to improve the quality of education. There is a dire need to focus on the quality of education. Both continents need to revisit their approaches of quality enhancement. India has also a diverse educational environment with varying quality of education across sectors and institutions. While renowned institutions like IIMs and IITs are world-renowned, many schools and colleges face challenges related to outdated faculty training, policy, and teaching methods. South Africa faces similar challenges to quality education. Quality varies from school to school, with some high-performing institutions as well as other struggling with inadequate resources, teachers, and support system. To ensure the quality education initiative, investing in education becomes essential. The potential of education has been very well recognized by governments and various organizations. So they are investing in the field to reduce poverty and create greater inclusive societies. Education financing is a political and social decision-making process through which public revenues and other resources are collected and allocated to finance education and lifelong learning opportunities. It is concerned with translating public and governmental various and visions and goals for educating and lifelong learning into financing sources among the way of financing school and educational institutions. Education is a global common good. It is direct and indirect benefits for individuals, their families, economies, societies, and the planet. Moreover, the benefits of lifelong learning is intergenerational. They reach the present generation without jeopardizing future generations. Education and learning are associated with other human rights and freedoms. From a human rights-based approach, the states have the obligation and responsibility to guarantee the realization of the rights to education. Free education reduces the cost of school and removes barriers to further education and a prosperous youth and adult lives. Africa has made impressive progress in spending on education with government, international organizations, and private foundations working together to close funding gaps and improve education systems. Many Asian countries have long prioritized education and allocated considerable resources to build strong education systems. Africa and Asia are embarking innovations and technological advancement to enhance education. The proliferation of mobile technologies has transcended industry boundaries and provided unique opportunities for students in remote areas. Africa has also got problem with digital infrastructure in contemporary times. The disparity in internet access between urban and rural people, the high cost of ICT, and unstable internet services are some of the issues limiting the expansion of internet-based delivery system in Africa. However, both continents have used innovative approaches such as e-learning platforms, mobile applications, and distance learning systems to expand access and improve the quality of education. Initiatives empower students and teachers, enhancing learning experience and fostering a culture of lifelong learning. Education in Africa and Asia also fosters a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. The startup and social enterprises focused on creating innovative solutions to address educational challenges and are emerging. These organizations are use technology, games, and adaptive learning strategies to create engaging and effective educational experiences. Through a culture of innovation, Africa and Asia are not only transforming their own educational systems, but also becoming global center of educational excellence. While both Asia and Africa have made a lot of progress, they also face various similar challenges. Both continents grapple with the need of ensure educational quality, relevance, and alignment with the demands of the rapidly changing world. Both continents are going through various demanding conditions in providing quality education to all of their citizens. In many African nations, education structures are still suffering to recover from the outcomes of colonialism and a long time of political instability. Many faculties lack fundamental assets, which includes textbooks, proficient teachers, and educate infrastructure. As a result, dropout rates are excessive and many children are not getting the appropriate education. For women, various hurdles to education consist of early marriages and cultural values that lead to priority education for men. Socioeconomic factors, geographical factors, climate change, water scarcity, biodiversity loss, natural disasters, food crisis, low benefits from globalization, trafficking and piracy, low penetration of ICT services, urbanization, inadequate aids and conflicts disrupt the education system and lead to dropouts. Also, the gap between school education and the requirements of the real world impact students' employability. Collaboration and knowledge sharing between Africa and Asia offer tremendous potential for addressing these challenges. By exchanging best practices, lesson learned, and innovative approaches, these continents can create a synergy that accelerate progress and leads to impactful solutions. Partnership in research, curriculum development, teacher training, and student exchange programs can foster mutual learning and support the aspirations of rising Africa and Asia in the field of education. Africa and Asia rising prominence is remarkable, and their combined strength, abundant resources, and expanding influence are changing the world's balance of power and improving the chances for a multilateral society. These continents are anticipated to play a bigger part in influencing international relations and the global economy as they become more diverse, ushering in a new era of opportunities and challenges. Hence, it becomes imperative to put more emphasis on the education system of both the continents. Addressing their issues calls for a lot of investment, professional training, infrastructure development, inclusive regulations, and collaboration between various communities, governments, and international organizations. The aim to make sure that and high quality education is available to each individual. I conclude the rising influence of Africa and Asia in the field of education is a cause of inspiration and celebration. These continents are embarking access, inclusivity, technology, innovation, and skill-based education to empower individuals, bridge gaps, and shape a brighter future. By investing in education, we are investing in the potential of millions of young minds, unleashing their talents and paving the way for sustainable development. Let us join hands, collaborate, and support rising Africa and Asia in their pursuit of educational excellence. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's so provoking. I think the reality is, and something that we've all learned from this conference. This morning I went around and I asked a few people for a thought or a word that captures this conference, something that they'll take home afterwards. And most of them said the energy of the youth and the realization that we've got so much to do, and the warmth of the conference as well. Dr. Engelbrecht, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Greiling to quickly come and introduce the next keynote speaker. I believe it's an online presentation, Prof. Do you want to hand over a gift? See then with the next presentation or the next preliminary speaker, if you just would like to do the introduction quickly. I just think, Jacques, do we have confirmation? Is the
I'm not sure. Let's just check. They're running it. We'll check now. Is it online?
Much Program Director. And before I introduce our candidate, no, our next speaker, I would like to ask Elaine if he can just show himself, because I'm so proud to introduce him. And I would like him to show his face. We don't only want to see your slides afterwards, Elaine. Can you hear us, Colin?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. It's so good to see you. Now I have to really stand on this side to see you. Thank you very much, Elaine, for getting up early and for joining us. Colleagues, this is one of my proudest moments in my life, to introduce this son of Africa, Elaine Kabundi, coming from the DRC, one of the bravest young men that I've ever met in my life. Elaine came to South Africa when he was 18 years old, just after school. This French-speaking person coming to not the University of Johannesburg, to the Rand Afrikaans University. I think at that stage it was still the Randse Afrikaanse Universiteit, where English was a foreign language. We just spoke that for survival. And here's this young person, this young man that decided, out of all the universities in South Africa, to come to the Rand Afrikaans University. He qualified for anything. But he decided to come to this particular university to study economics. And I met him as a young person. And he's one of those that immediately makes such an impact in your life. And we've decided, Elaine, that in Africa, we don't only read the CVs and tell the latest information. We tell them as, who is Elaine? Elaine is married to a beautiful woman. That's all I can say. And he has two extremely clever children. His eldest is going to the University of Virginia, now coming for pre-med. So he's a very, very proud father. But I've also met his parents during his marriage, and also when he did his defense of his studies. Proud, very, very, very proud parents of Elaine. But I'm also his proud mother. And I will tell you why, because he studied economics and he went the whole route. If anyone here feels a little despondent about your progress, don't be. Ellen started as an assistant, as a part-time lecturer, as a lecturer, a junior lecturer, senior lecturer, associate professor, professor. He worked right through the ranks, and he was never once feeling that this is not fair. He did each and every one of those positions. He did with so much pride and so much conviction and so much emphasis in terms of that. Elaine did very well as a student. So well that he received the Finance Week prize for the best honors in the country. He received the Finance Week award for the best masters in the country. He received the Founders Medal for the best masters in the country. And I want to tell you about his title, so to understand how much he challenged us. This is the year 2002, and he wrote his master's on neural networks and econometric models, a comparison. Now, I was one of the supervisors. I didn't have an idea what is a neural network. I actually didn't even have an idea what's econometrics. But fortunately, there was a supervisor. I was just a co-supervisor. There was a supervisor that is very strong in stats and maths. And I can just remember vaguely there was some diagrams with lots of lines. Sorry, Elaine, you didn't do a good job. I didn't learn from you. That was the year 2002. Then in 2007, he wrote his PhD. And the title of that PhD was the South African Integration into Global Economy, a structural dynamic factor analysis. That was 2007. Now, something that might be already now being well known was totally unknown in 2007. Fortunately, he dropped me as a supervisor. Because of that one, I didn't know a thing. And we had to appoint him 4 supervisors to help him through this. So we had the statistician, mathematician to do it. We had an econometrician. And then we had to appoint external international supervisors because there was just no one in South Africa that could guide him through all of this. Now you can think how hard it was to find external examiners for something that the world doesn't know about. But colleagues, this is where we are so proud of African rising. And as I say, son of Africa. So after this academic stance in the University of Johannesburg, there was just seemed like not enough challenges because Alan decided to join the South African Reserve Bank as the lead researcher. Now, anyone working with the Reserve Bank knows that there's a lot of pressure to bring up constantly working papers high level, and he was the main researcher in terms of that. After a few years, he left the South Africa Reserve Bank and he went to the World Bank as a senior economist for the chief economist in the vice presidency. This is all in terms of policy formulation. And he joined the IMF now as an economist since 2022, August 2022. I read on the emails, on Wi-Fi, because when I asked him for a CV, he just said, well, I've done my PhD and I'm working at the IMF. I had to search to get some of these information. And I found from REPEC that Alan is in the top 5% of authors and researchers in the world. So if that is not worth a round of applause, nothing worth. Working papers. Now, working papers, macroeconomics, monetary, central banking, forecasting, urban and rural, I'm reading here. Econometrics, energy, economics, agriculture, development, financial markets, environmental and econometric time series. Then, as far as I could count, there is 68 working papers, full working papers. He has 43 published articles, accredited articles in the major journals. Colleagues, this is our friend. This is an example of the quality that is in Africa. But what I appreciate of Alan is that what he's doing and what he did in the World Bank and what he's doing in the IMF is still focused on African and the African region. So his advice, his field of study, his advice that he's giving to the World Bank IMF is on Africa because he understands the culture, he understands the issues, he understands who we are as people from Africa and where we want to be and what are the challenges that we have. When I communicated with him and I couldn't find him, where is? Well, I will send him something and then he doesn't respond and he just said, sorry, but I am in Mongolia. And I said, well, now I have to look on the map, where is Mongolia? So, colleagues, I give to you my child from the DRC, that is a giant in terms of economics, Dr. Alain Kabunde. Alain, we look forward to listen to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Lorraine, for this emotional and introduction. Can you see my slide? Can you see my slide? I hope you can.
Thank you, Alain. It's clear. Thank you so much. We can see it.
Okay. Thank you, Lorraine, for first of all for the invitation. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your kind introduction and very emotional. I hope that I can live to that standard. I found that you have raised the standard quite high. Thank you for being there and receiving me. First time that I joined the University of Johannesburg. And then part of me is your input. So you can be proud of yourself as a teacher that you have contributed to somebody like me. So part of my presentation here, you can look at it as you have your input in what I'm presenting now. So the title of my presentation is How Persistent Are Climate-Related Price Shocks and then Implication for Monetary Policy. This is a joint paper with two co-authors, all of them based here at the IMF. Is Montfort Mlamshila, who used to be the IMF representative in South Africa. Actually, I met Montfort while I was still at a Reserve Bank, and then we've done some research since then. And then Jiaoqian Yao worked in the European department, but he used to be with Montfort in the African department. And then I myself, I'm in monetary and capital markets department. So the normal disclaimer applies. So the views that I'm going to present here are my own, do not represent the views of the IMF or the IMF authorities. The outline of my presentation will be is as follows. I'll start with the motivation of my talk. I'll discuss the related literature. Then I'll move to the data and then outline some stylized facts. I'll discuss empirical results based on the local projection model. And then I'll conclude with some policy implications. On a motivation, many studies done on climate work up to now are based on the impact on growth. But this current study look at inflation. Why are we doing that? Because climate change poses a challenge to monetary policy formulation. Climate shocks induce both demand and supply shocks to the economy. But what poses a challenge to monetary policy is the supply shocks leg of climate shocks. So it will induce, if it is a supply shock, it will be there will be a trade-off between higher inflation and low growth. It's like what we are facing right now, although it is not a climate shock, but you can see already that monetary policy around the world are really battling on whether to reduce inflation with the risk of creating recession or support growth with and then let inflation run. More frequent supply shocks will be also of a nature that will induce, it will create tension on whether the shock is permanent or transitory, more or less like what the advanced economies faced after these supply shocks. Most of central banks were behind the curve is just because they could not identify whether the shock that they were facing was a permanent or transitory. We are taught, and then inflation rate targeting policy is based on the fact that you do not react to supply shocks because you can just look through it as the supply shocks are temporary. But it becomes a real issue if supply shocks are permanent. The risk of doing nothing, that can de-anchor inflation expectation and lead to wage spiral inflation. The other challenge that climate shock poses is on policy uncertainty. For example, carbon tax. We don't really know how this carbon tax affects demand, investment, and then it can affect inflation expectations and make monetary policy quite difficult. There is also an impact that climate shock can bring in depressing potential outputs and hence equilibrium interest rate or R star. In so doing, they will affect monetary policy. It becomes quite difficult in this environment to forecast potential output and then to conduct monetary policy. So what do we do in this paper? In this paper, we assess the impact of climate shock on consumer price inflation. And with the climate shock, we have a natural disaster. And then we also look at the impact on the temperature as well as precipitation. We use quarterly data at the national level, which is mainly used in many studies, but we have also results at a subnational level, which actually supports our national level results. But today, I'm only going to present the national level results. The rest you can read in the paper. What we also do, what is quite different to other papers where they look at only point estimates, we use a local projection model, which help us to assess the persistent impacts on inflation. Hence, to answer the question of whether these shocks are permanent or transitory. The related literature in this field, many literature use, as I mentioned before, the impact of climate change on growth. Actually, many studies come to the conclusion that the impact is long-lasting. Most recently, there are a few papers that have looked at the relationship between climate change and or climate shock and inflation, but most of them, they focus on advanced economies as well as emerging market economies. And there are a few studies that are looking at the impact on low-income countries. And then there was also literature looking at the impact of climate shocks on monetary policy. And the first one is looking at the climate shock that are becoming more frequent and severe. What I'm going also to show here, that this is evident. It lowers R star and make the conduct of monetary policy quite difficult. On the financial side, there's a literature looking at the impact of climate shock on asset prices. For example, on house prices, looking at impact of climate shock on bonds and equity. So the paper on modeling, there was one paper, this one here, where they use the South African data. Where can I get the pointer? Okay. I hope you can see this one has a is a paper with two former colleagues from the Reserve Bank, where they are looking at the impact of climate shocks, the result that climate shocks make monetary policy modeling quite difficult. And then there are a series of papers looking at the monetary policy formulation, whether monetary policy, which policy is appropriate to address climate shock. Is it nominal targeting? Is it still inflation rate targeting good in this environment? And we are going to do the same thing in this study. And then there are a few papers looking on emerging markets. And as I mentioned, that the exception is this paper with some two Reserve Bank co-authors. So what we're going to do is, in addition to the impact on advanced economies, emerging market economies, we'll be also looking at the impact on low-income countries. We use two sets of data set. The first one is the EM DAT, which incorporates many series of climate shocks, and then the temperature and precipitation. We are using the data from East Anglia, and this one is monthly. The EM DAT is taken from Université Catholique de Louvain. That is daily data. So we take all this information, even the daily and the monthly, and then we transform them in a quarterly. So our analysis is based on a quarterly data. Inflation is taken from the IFS data set. And then we have, in total, 33 advanced economies, 76 emerging market economies, and 53 low-income countries. And we divide our sample to assess the relevance of monetary policy. We use 28 inflation rate targeting countries and 73 non-IT countries. The subnational level, we use, this is the data set that we use. We also use the EM DAT, and then we use the World Food Program prices for food prices. The definition of our shocks, what we do, that we take the information that we have in EM DAT on natural disaster, and then we transform them into qualitative data, such that the first one is the variable that we call intensity, is we take the number of fatalities plus the 30% of affected. And if that number as a certain percentage of population is greater than a certain threshold, we look at it as a climate variable. And then it is zero otherwise. And then we aggregate that at a quarterly level. If, for example, we have two natural disasters in one quarter, so that will give us 2. If we have 3, it will give us 3. And then the A, we also have asymmetry in the climate shocks because it depends on whether the climate shock is moderate, and moderate is that A that we have here, the threshold is 0.01% of population. It is severe if it is a 1% of population. So we distinguish between severe and moderate shocks. On the temperature side, we look at the deviation of temperature to the 30 years average and divide by the standard deviation of the 30 year. And which means that this Z score that we have, it is a standardized value, which look at the deviation of 30 years. We do the same for precipitation, so we use the same formula as the temperature. Now, these are our stylized facts. The picture on my left, from this picture, you can see that climate shocks have become more frequent. The frequency is, if we look at, for example, flood, the frequency has tripled from what it was before. We had 50 occurrences in a year. Now we have 150. So there is evidence of higher, the frequency has increased. The same, one can see the same with the storm is more or less double. The flood is the most frequent, storm is a second. The other one that we use is drought. Why did we choose these 3? Because these 3 are the ones that affect more inflation. So this is why we selected these 3. And then here, it is more or less the same picture. The picture on my right divide the sample size into decades. And then one can see also the evidence that climate shocks has become more frequent. Now at the country level, there was an increase, especially in low-income countries. Beforehand, we had only 1 incident every 2 years. But now it has increased, even in low-income countries has 2 incidents on average every year of natural disaster, which is more the same across countries. Now, looking at the temperature, here we have evidence of global warming. Because if you look at this distribution, it is on the right side of 0. Remember, the way that we constructed the Z score is looking at the deviation from the past 30-year temperature. So there is evidence that the temperature has increased. And then here we're looking at the difference between IT and non-IT. So there is no such a difference. But then when you consider advanced economies, emerging markets, and low-income countries, the low-income countries tend to have a higher temperature. Is just because they are more or less located in the tropical region. So this is what this information is capturing. Looking on the precipitation side, we do not see a huge deviation from the past 30-year average. Now, for this empirical result, given that we have this information, we know that there is evidence of global warming. It is affecting all the countries, and particularly low-income countries. we use now the local projection model. And then this model is, we take, this is an inflation equation, is it depends on a set of controls. This is a lag inflation. And here we include the intensity measure or the natural disaster measure, and looking at that impact of natural disaster on inflation. So then we're going to use an impulse response function to assess what will be the response of inflation to a natural disaster shock. If I shock D, and how inflation will react. Okay. Now I'm going to present to you a set of impulse responses, looking at the asymmetric results. First of all, whether the shock, the disaster is severe, is moderate. We're going to divide also across advanced economies, emerging market economies, low-income countries, and then we do the same with precipitation. For all disasters, so a climate shock will induce inflationary, a drought will be inflationary, while flood is deflationary. And then storm, there is an uptick on inflation here, but then becomes a deflationary. The rationale on natural disaster yielding to a deflationary impact for flood is just because here we have a flood is more, the demand shock prevails over supply shock, because you have a demand that is acting as well as a supply shock. But in case of flood, we have a dominance of a demand shock over supply shock. Or it can also be that the flood, there was also a temporal and a special dimension to this. For example, flood is on a temporal level, affect only countries in the beginning of rainy season, as well as the middle of a rainy season. So people can still, the farmers can still harvest what they have replanted after flood, which actually you have more food than in case of drought. The other thing is the spatial. Floods only affect a small portion of the country. For example, what happened in the KwaZulu-Natal was located in the KwaZulu-Natal. It didn't affect the entire country. However, drought has a more spatial impact. For example, in the Horn of Africa, there are many countries that are affected at the same time. For example, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Kenya, all these countries have been affected. And then the impact of drought is still up to now. So it is a long-lasting impact. Now, if the shock is moderate, you see that the impact is even larger compared to when we use just the general disaster. And here we can see quite evidently that storm has a positive impact at the beginning of the sample before becomes deflationary. And then with the severe, it is even more evident. So the impact depends on the intensity of shocks. Now, let's do the same exercise, looking at advanced economies, how advanced economies are affected. This affects emerging market economies and then low-income countries. For advanced economies, drought is inflationary, flood is inflationary, as well as a storm is inflationary. But now when we look at the moderate, The first one, it does not mean that the drought is does not affect advanced economies. It's zero. It's just because on a moderate level, we don't have data on that. Data for the moderate is zero. No country pass our definition of moderate disaster. The same applies for severe storm. But for moderate and severe, we can see that storm is deflationary. And then move to emerging market economies. For emerging market economies, we find that evidence of drought being inflationary, but this impact is short-lived and becomes statistically insignificant. Flood and storm are deflationary. So you can see from here that there is a difference also across countries. And then this is for moderate, and then it is for severe. And then we move to low-income countries. With low-income countries, drought is inflationary, flood and storm are deflationary. And the evidence is even stronger by using moderate and severe storm. And then looking at the impact on monetary policy, how countries are reacting to this. If we start with IT, IT countries, the impact of drought is short-lived on inflation. So it is inflationary only at the first quarter, and then the impact dies out. For the rest of the disasters, we don't see evidence of inflation there. But when we compare to non-IT countries, here you can see that the impact was short-lived, but here is a long-lasting impact with a non-IT. So it seems like the IT countries have managed to contain inflation, not only at the size, but also the duration. Inflation is just short-lived, but here with a non-IT, inflation stays quite longer. The same as for storm. For non-IT countries, you can see that the storm, while if it was non-inflationary at the beginning of the sample, but becomes inflationary later on. This is for EM. We didn't do the exercise for low-income countries because of the sample size. There are a few low-income countries that passes the acid test of IT as it is defined. And what we did, now we have evidence that the drought is more inflationary than flood and storm. And then we say that drought is more inflationary just because this drought affects more food. Now, to understand that, we did the same analysis. Now, instead of using an overall inflation, we look at food inflation. And then there is evidence there that food inflation, with the food inflation, drought affect more food inflation, increasing up to more than 50 percentage points. At one stage, it even approaches the 10 percentage points. However, for flood, we have evidence of deflationary at the beginning, and then we have inflation coming later on. Storm is inflationary. Moving now to after climate shocks, what we do now, we move to temperature and precipitation. just to find out whether the result that we have is we have more. It is a kind of a robustness check whether these results stand. This is the result that we have across advanced economies for temperature and precipitation. Higher temperature, we don't see impact there, but then only for emerging market economies, where we see that temperature has an inflationary impact, but the precipitation has a deflationary impact. For low-income countries, we do not have evidence there. And then for precipitation is a negative. But then these results hide interesting dynamic. What we do for us to find out the evidence of inflation is we separate temperature, positive temperature to negative temperature, positive precipitation to negative precipitation. And negative precipitation, you can see it as a lack of rain. So which is more or less the same as a drought. So these are the results that we find, but I will suggest that we focus on only those that are positive and those that are statistically significant and inflationary. These are the ones that are circled in red. Positive temperature affect inflation in emerging market economies. But what is interesting is the negative precipitation. Remember what I said, that the negative precipitation can be seen as a lack of rain, which is more or less mimicking the impact that we have on drought. So for advanced economies, inflation, we don't have inflation at the beginning of the sample, but it is inflationary later on. For emerging market economies, we have evidence of inflation. This induced inflation, the same as low-income countries. Actually, for low-income countries, it is more inflationary, the impact is higher and lasts longer than in emerging market economies and advanced economies. When we're looking at precipitation again, the impact of monetary policy, one can see that, again, the same, IT tends to contain inflation in the face of adverse temperature, while non-IT countries, we have evidence of inflation. For precipitation, again, it is deflationary across. So what we have done here, we investigate the impact of climate shocks on inflation, looking at a natural disaster, meaning drought, flood, and storm, as well as temperature and precipitation. The impact on high headline inflation and food inflation. We use a wide variety of countries. According to income status, we see that income status matters. So low-income countries are more affected by drought compared to advanced economies. And then our findings are the frequency of shocks have increased. We have evidence of global warming. We have evidence of heterogeneous impact. And then the heterogeneous is according to type of disaster, income level, and then monetary policy does matter, and where IT countries tend to contain inflation compared to non-IT. Now going forward, the test is a IT country, is it going to contain if we have a more frequent disaster and that becomes severe at the same time? So that is a question for future research. I'm sorry for being long, but thank you.
So I have not seen stats for some time because I'm a law person. So I had to really focus and I had my dean next to me. So hope that I didn't do too bad. Ladies and gentlemen, was there any questions? What a fantastic presentation. I actually understood it, which is amazing on itself, all these stats. Any questions? Nothing. All I know is when I go to Woolworths, I can see the prices are increasing. A packet of apples was 27 Rand, is now 43 Rand. And I'm trying to figure out, with all due respect, what can contribute to these huge price increases that we are experiencing currently. But I think I have the gist of it now. Thank you very much. Prof. Cragen, you had a question.
Just thank you. I don't know where's my economist friends. Alan, thank you very much for the presentation. Because I think this contributes a lot to our discussion in South Africa that at the moment is focused and where there's a lot of political pressure to say, is inflation targeting still valid? Is this the thing to do at the moment? Do we even have to look at the concept of climate change? Is it so important? Isn't it something that we can worry about after 50 years and rather focus now on to the short term? And what you've done using this data and in terms of this comparison is to show, and that is why I find this inflation targeting countries versus the non-inflation target countries and the difference of the impact of droughts and temperature changes, etc., and how that then quickly reflects in the non-inflation target countries, especially in the food inflation, which impacts us as a lower income, very struggling income country. So this research then confirms that by following stringent monetary policy, it basically protects the consumer in the end. And the full impact of natural disasters and droughts, etc., is not absorbed then by the normal demanders of food that doesn't have any income. So this will be a double jeopardy if we now relax monetary policy or inflation targeting, get rid of inflation targeting, because it means that the producer suffers, the demand, the consumer suffers, and there's nothing to protect us. So it is a very difficult discussions that we are currently in terms of the role of inflation targeting. Should it be replaced by something else? And to bring then inflation targeting together with, all of these drought and the environmental issues. Thank you very much. It just opens a new level of discussions that I think in UniZulu will definitely take this on and try to research this and come with some studies, etc. Thank you so much.
Prof. Tibari, you have a question as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. It's a very thought-provoking paper. And my question to you, it confirms what I believed. So I just want to confirm my belief to you and see what you say. Does it confirm Milton Friedman's theory on monetary policy? You have to always control monetary policy. So I believe your paper is confirming Milton Friedman's hypothesis. What do you think? Thank you.
Yes, definitely. What I think is, you see, there is a trade-off because monetary policy authorities are in the face of supply shocks is quite challenging for them, whether you have to, on the left side, people will say that one has to contain support the economy, meaning to support growth. But on the other hand, if you just let inflation run, and you can lose the inflation battle, which becomes quite difficult for you at a later stage when you want to fight this inflation. Expectations will become the anchor. This we actually faced it when I was at the World Bank at Chief Economist African region, when Ghana was facing this inflationary pressure. And after COVID, it was not a climate shock, but it was a severe supply shock. They tend to contain output. And then we saw in front of our eyes how inflation ran from 15%, and then later stage, no, it started actually single digits, around 9, and then little by little moving up. They were still doing nothing. We advised them that they had to contain this inflation, but they didn't want to. And then inflation reached 20%. After that, it was in the 30s. So when they lost the battle of inflation, inflation was not increasing linearly, but it started increasing exponentially. And it becomes, now they are facing this challenge of bringing that inflation down. You are actually lucky in South Africa that you are among the few that started increasing interest rate earlier compared to other countries like in advanced economies where they were behind the curve. So doing nothing is like a small kid closing his eyes and thinking that it is dark. So the light is still there, inflation is still there if you ignore it. Unfortunately, this is what we are saying here. So this is a long answer to your short question. The short answer will be yes, Milton Friedman is right. We have to fight inflation. Is an animal that affects even more the poorest than anything else. In this study, we actually we cited one of my papers done on Uganda, looking at the determinants of inflation in Uganda. In that paper, we actually found that inflation in Uganda was more determined by food price inflation. It's just because of the percentage of the an average household that they spend on food. As food is impacted by drought, so similar study I've done on Ethiopia and a couple of African countries, where we found that the food price inflation is de-inflation in those countries. And then this is affected by drought in the part of these countries, and monetary policy has to do something. If they don't, so the poorest of the poor are the most affected.
In Ghana is now 42% from the poverty, and the interest rate 32%.
I didn't get that.
42% inflation in Ghana.
Yeah, and 32%
Yeah.
interest rate.
And 32% interest rate in Ghana.
Yeah.
We have one more question from Dr. Harris.
Thank you, Prof, for the presentation. Privileged to listen, and I know you don't remember, but we met in Grahamstown in 2017 during the ESA conference.
Okay.
When I was presenting my paper, you gave me constructive feedback. But today, when you're presenting, I was trying to comprehend when you were saying that floods tend to be deflationary. So I was trying to imagine if you are if floods are to hit, let's say, a province that is a stronghold in terms of agriculture, and probably production gets to be affected by floods. Isn't that going to be having very strong shocks on the supply side? And won't that have a strong effect in terms of prices of food, given that probably there'll be heavy shocks on the supply?
No, you are right. When we, after getting this result, we were quite puzzled. And then we say that we were expecting actually to see what you are alluding to. But then digging a bit deeper and then using different, if you go to the paper, you'll see that there's an army of modeling that went behind and trying to find out what is the reason. And then what we find that this is, remember, it is on average. When you look at our result in subnational level, then we find the positive impact of drought, flood on inflation. So it can be inflationary, depend on what is more dominant at that particular point. We are using, because when you have flood, you have both demand and supply that are interacting. On the demand side is mainly the risk aversion. The supply side is the destruction of infrastructure and so on. So that is the most affecting. And then you can see that when you assess on a subnational level, you see evidence of those impacts. But then that is at a national level because of drought. And then the second reason is flood located at a particular area in the country, right? So if it is a small country that is highly affected, then one could find evidence of inflation. But then if it is just located in one small area and then you have the entire country, it is quite difficult for you to see that impact. The impact will be isolated. So while looking at the inflation at the country level, it will be difficult. The other explanation is the flood happens at the beginning. That is a temporal explanation that I gave. Beginning of the rainy season and middle of the rainy season. So it happens that after the flood, the farmers can still plant and then reap and harvest, and then you don't see the impact later on price. So the impact could be mitigated because they have time to replant again and then they reap the harvest. So it depends. One has to come up and isolate or see a particular country, do the analysis on the particular country, and whether it is a small country, it is a bigger country, the flood, did it have a huge impact, or the impact was isolated? So by doing that, you can see more evidence of that. Actually, this is what I would like to do going forward, is taking that result and digging a bit deeper and see which one, beyond our subnational level, and then come up with more evidence of inflationary impact. But thank you. That was an interesting question. Yeah.
Right. I think last question I see there's someone in the back there, either waving at me. Are you hungry, or do you want to ask a question? We are talking about supply and demand. I think you'll have to come to the front. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for the interesting presentation. This is Howard from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. As economists, we say it's quite strange if you see even two economists sitting in one place and agreeing. Now, Alan, on your presentation, would we not say that Milton Friedman was wrong? Wrong that in his famous statement that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Now, think of it this way, in terms of your presentation, you're talking about climate change shocks. And then let's think in terms of, let's say, droughts, floods. And then as Harris has put it, you're talking about supply shocks, yeah? And then there are all these structural rigidities in the economy. For example, the example that Harris presented, we have floods, and then the economy is slow in responding to produce adequate food, and then prices go up. Structural rigidity has nothing to do with money. Would we say Milton Friedman was wrong? That's number one. No. Number two, when you're talking about climate change shocks, you're talking about probably in most instances, permanent shocks. In that instance, what would the response, what does it mean to have the monetary authorities respond? Because I am struggling with an issue here where we have a permanent shock. And then the authorities, when they have to respond, what do they have to do when there's a permanent change in the structural rigidity of the economy? So if it's floods, you know that we have floods this year, they're gone next year, the economy adjusts back to equilibrium. If it's drought, we have drought this year, the economy adjusts backwards to equilibrium. But if the economy is heating up, then it just heats up. And then isn't it that we have to have some other structures of the economy, government, or whatever it is, responding rather than the monetary authorities? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Harold. And then to see you, I hope we're going to meet again when you are here in Washington, D.C. It's always nice to talk to you. So on the first question, I think it is more ideological. I just leave it to the debate about this, whether Milton Friedman or the Keynesian have been right. I think that nowadays people sit in the middle, and then we see some of the hardcore monetarists seeing evidence of intervention, not leaving the economy on its own, and then on the other hand, people that are more Keynesian taking both views. It is quite, if you go now to Chicago, it is quite difficult for you to believe that Milton Friedman was there in Chicago. So there are Keynesian, new Keynesian papers being presented today and so on. You go to MIT, it is the same. You see people like Olivier Blanchard now telling us that we have to use a capital control and so on. So it is quite difficult nowadays to see where people are sitting on the ideological side. Especially for me as an empirical person, I just believe what I see. I use my models, and then if it supports the evidence, say by the theory, and then I say that, yeah, this is what I see. So moving now to your second question, yes, this permanent shock that I'm alluding to is not that when you have a flood, you will have a flood for the entire year or for the entire period. We say that the frequency of the shocks has increased. So you are hit by flood now, and then a couple of months again, you have another flood, and then you have another, or you have a drought that comes up. Drought stays quite longer. Storm, one can also see it as you have a storm, especially, for example, here in the US, you can be hit by storm many times. The the frequency has increased than it used to be. So if the frequency was short and transitory, one could just say that we look through it. It comes, it will go, and then I'll react. But then if the frequency has increased, it will be difficult because the impact on inflation then will be persistent, because you are hit by a drought now, and then there's another drought that comes next year, and there's another drought that will come the year after. So the frequency has increased and the impact lasts longer on prices. Now, on the reaction side, saying that whether it should be, who should react? Would it be a monetary policy or a combination? I would say that I think we have now evidence of that from the COVID. It would be nice if it is a combination of the two, both monetary policy authority as well as the fiscal authority. But on the fiscal side, it is always difficult for them to consolidate. It is quite difficult for them. When you ask them to consolidate, they don't want to, especially if they are approaching election period. They don't want to consolidate, and then the only institution could do that easily is a central bank. But I agree with you that the central bank can run out of ammunition as well. So I'm not a proponent of using quantitative easing every time that you are facing some challenges and so on, or using a conventional monetary policy every time that you are facing some challenges. For example, in this instance, it's not that you're going to use a conventional monetary, you're going to use a QE, but you can increase, you can increase interest rates in such that it send the economy into a deep recession. So I would say that what one could do, it would be a combination of monetary policy as well as some other policies. One can use a prudential policy. One could use to curb inflation, or one could use a fiscal policy.
I think that concludes questions. I think one more heads of applause just for a very thought-provoking presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me for the conference. I wish you all the best. I'm sorry that I could not be there. South Africa is my second country. Next time, that definitely I will do my best to join you. Thank you.
The other area is coming from
a few minutes of your time before we go for lunch.
It's not, I'm not going to have a lot of time, but colleagues, I introduced our MBALI conference with a team to you. And now I want Sianda, please bring the whole team. You know what, to run a blended learning team, to do all of these branding, marketing, printing of material, online, website, social media.
Yeah.
That is not something that just happens. There's a whole team, and you saw the two young men, as I say, I know exactly what you want. One step into the front, a little bit to this side, turn like this.
Yeah.
I know the recipe now. So the two photographers, you saw a lot. But please, Sianda, come here and come and introduce your whole team, and so that we can really recognize our community, our communication and marketing division. And that is really the heart and soul. And they work for a whole year with a marketing plan, working with us non-stop, consistent. And I think it's so important that you get the recognition as well for doing this for this conference. please.
Hello.
All of you need to stand here so that we can see you.
More.
Good evening, everybody. Afternoon, everybody. My name is Sian Amtamo, Communications and Marketing Manager. We have a journalist. We have Camille Van der Veef, who's our graphic designer. We have the events coordinator, Toby Lemoni. And we have Unale Shefane, who's our applications officer. Then we have James Twala, who's our multimedia journalist. We have Polani Vidi, who's our graphic designer. And we have our web administrator, MBALI. Thanks a lot, guys. This is the CMP team that's joined
Very much. Humble people, they don't even want to stay here for a picture. I said they must stay here, come for a picture, because I want to get James and everyone back. See if they can go into listen where the people start. No, you need to stand there in front of the banner. That's what I said to all of us.
From two people at the same Solani, we have
One step please in a little bit. Going smart.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, now for the good news, food, lunch. Lunch is served. Whereafter we'll then proceed with the normal program. I think it's session 5 and session 6 breakaways. Enjoy your lunch.